Hello, my name is Austin Habish, the founder of Think Catholic, and you're listening to the Summa podcast, where we study St. Thomas Aquinas' Summa Theologiae in a way simple and insightful for anyone to understand. The Summa podcast is brought to you by Think Catholic. Taking 2 questions of the Summa a day, we'll seek to summarize St. Thomas's responses, discovering the brilliance of Aquinas. And his Catholic faith is day 280. So let's get started. We're covering today questions 45 and 46 of the supplement to the Summa. That is, of the marriage consent considered in itself, and of the consent to which an oath or carnal intercourse is added. The translation that I always use in these podcasts is the one generously provided to me by Ave Maria Press, the 5-volume set translated by the Fathers of the English Dominican province, which you can now get at a discounted price from Ave Maria Press's site by typing in the code SUMMA10, and so here we go. Article 1, whether consent is the efficient cause of matrimony. An efficient cause is the cause, simply put, which brings about the effect. Like when I throw a ball, it is my hand-arm muscles which are the efficient cause of that ball flying through the air. When it comes to the efficient cause of matrimony, our author writes, one person does not receive power over that which is at the free disposal of another without the latter's consent. Now by marriage, each of the married parties receives power over the other's body, that's 1 Corinthians 7:4, whereas hitherto each had free power over his own body. Therefore consent makes a marriage. We can further say, since Christ raised marriage to a sacrament, that when validly conferred, because it is a sacrament which confers grace, which must come from God, God is also the efficient cause. I would like to say that God is the efficient cause and the consent of the spouse is the instrumental cause. Since St. Thomas writes here, it follows that the spiritual joining is the effect of the divine power by means of the material joining. But take that causal distinction with a grain of salt. But we know for sure both God and the consent in some way, though, are the efficient cause of matrimony. Article 2, whether the consent needs to be expressed in words. What outward washing is to the sacrament of baptism, the spoken words of consent are to the sacrament of marriage. And since one cannot put down on paper a contract, consent, unless normally speaking, the will of each person has already been expressed to one another. That's normally how deals work out. There's a verbal consent, then a written one. It is appropriate that the will of the man and the woman be voiced in words before anything be then written down concerning the consent of marriage. Article 3, whether consent given in words expressive of the future makes a marriage. To promise to marry in the future sense, which is a betrothal or engagement, does not make one married, does not make for marriage, for it could always be dissolved before consent is actually given in the present tense. This follows from the fact that engagements and betrothals are concerning something unrealized, which is in the future. St. Thomas writes here, further, he who promises to do a certain thing does it not yet. Now he who consents in words of the future tense promises to marry a certain woman, therefore he does not marry her yet. Article 4, whether in the absence of inward consent, a marriage is made by consent given in words of the present. This is an important question. First of all, what would outward consent without inward consent consist in? It would consist in a lie. If I were to vow myself in matrimony to a woman with my words, yet in the will not make such a determination, not intend to be joined to this woman in such a way as I'm stating in my words of consent, is the marriage still contracted? Does the sacrament of marriage still occur? And the answer is no. The sacraments cannot be forced upon a person. Like baptism, if water is poured over a person and the one baptizing him observes the correct form, but the person being baptized does not want to be baptized, then he is not baptized. To quote St. Thomas, the outward cleansing stands in the same relation to baptism as the expression of words to the sacrament. Wherefore, just as were a person to receive the outward cleansing with the intention not of receiving the sacrament, but of acting in jest or deceit, he would not be baptized. So too, expression of words without inward consent makes no marriage. Article 5, whether consent given secretly in words of the present makes a marriage. Is a secret wedding valid? And Aquinas says, on the one hand, given the cause, the effect follows. Now the sufficient cause of matrimony is consent, expressed in words of the present. Therefore, whether this be done in public or in private, the result is a marriage. However, marriage for the Catholic is not just a human institution governed by natural law or civil law, but also ecclesiastical law, since the sacraments were instituted by Christ and given over to his apostles, the Church, to administer. Thus, the Council of Trent declared, "Those who shall attempt to contract marriage otherwise than in the presence of the parish priest, or of some other priest by permission of the said parish priest, or of the ordinary, and in the presence of 2 or 3 witnesses, the Holy Synod renders such wholly incapable of thus contracting and declares such contracts invalid and null, as by the present decree it invalidates and annuls them." And canon law also has many things to say on this topic, but as to the possibility of a secret wedding, if it has pastoral approval, it states as Canon 1130, for a grave and urgent cause, the local ordinary can permit a marriage to be celebrated secretly. We move then on to question 46 of the consent to which an oath or carnal intercourse is appended. Article 1, whether an oath added to the consent that is expressed in words of the future tense makes a marriage. Aquinas responds this briefly, what is future is not yet. Now the addition of an oath does not make words of the future tense signify anything else than consent to something future. Therefore it is not a marriage yet. Article 2 in our last article, whether carnal intercourse after consent expressed in words of the future makes a marriage. Now, we just talked about words in the future and how that doesn't make for marriage. But speaking of carnal intercourse, we've spoken about that at length already, whether the marital embrace or carnal intercourse makes one married. St. Thomas repeats for us here, that which follows a thing does not make it, but carnal intercourse follows the actual marriage as effect follows cause. Therefore, it cannot make a marriage. Canon law states, this is Canon 1057, the consent of the parties legitimately manifested between persons qualified by law makes marriage. So again, it's about the consent. And thus we close another episode. We've just finished covering questions 45 and 46 of the supplement to the Summa, that is, of the marriage consent considered in itself and of the consent added to which an oath or carnal intercourse is added. My name is Austin Habish with Think Catholic, and I cannot wait to see you tomorrow.